The hum of the industrial HVAC system was the only thing keeping me sane during those graveyard shifts at the archive facility. A sound that usually blended into the background like white noise. But tonight, at exactly 2:14 a.m., the frequency shifted, dropping an octave until it resonated in the very marrow of my bones. I was sitting at the security desk, the glow of the monitors casting long, distorted shadows across the rows of gray filing cabinets that stretched into the darkness of the warehouse. When the motion sensor for aisle 12 blinked from green to red, I leaned forward, my pulse quickening, and watched the static-filled feed. Nothing was there, just empty metal shelving and the dust motes dancing in the cold air. But then a single sheet of paper detached itself from a folder on the floor, lifted as if caught in a draft, and began to drift through the air with a deliberate swimming motion. It didn't fall. It hovered, navigating the narrow gap between the shelves with the grace of a living thing, before sliding perfectly back into an empty slot. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the concrete floor, and grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, the beam cutting a violent path through the gloom as I walked toward the back of the facility, my footsteps sounding unnaturally heavy in the silence. The air grew colder the deeper I went, and I noticed the scent of ozone and something sweet, like rotting flowers, clinging to the metallic tang of the storage space. When I reached aisle 12, I saw that the floor was covered in a fine layer of frost, despite the facility being climate controlled, and there were small, circular impressions in the ice, as if someone had been walking on their tiptoes. I called out, my voice sounding thin and small in the vastness, but no one answered. And as I shone my light down the length of the aisle, I realized that every single folder had been pulled out, just an inch, creating a jagged, uneven line that looked like a set of teeth. I started to back away, the sense of being watched prickling the skin on the back of my neck. And that's when I heard the rhythm, a soft, metallic click, 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 like a fingernail tapping on the metal shelving, moving rapidly from one end of the aisle to the other. I turned to run, but the layout of the warehouse had changed. The exit sign that had been clearly visible to my left was now blocked by a wall of industrial crates that hadn't been there a moment ago. I stopped, forcing myself to breathe, and realized I needed to follow the rules of the building, the ones I had learned during my first week, even if they seemed like superstitions meant to keep a lonely night shift worker busy. I closed my eyes, turned around 3 times, and knocked twice on the nearest steel upright, just as the old supervisor had jokingly told me to do if I ever felt off. When I opened my eyes, the crates were gone and the aisle was empty, but the feeling of being watched was stronger, an almost tactile pressure against my shoulder. I didn't look back. I walked at a steady pace to the front desk, my heart thudding against my ribs, and sat back down, refusing to look at the monitor for aisle 12 until the sun began to bleed through the high, reinforced windows. The next night, I brought a notebook to record the shifts and patterns, the way the ambient light in the parking lot seemed to dim whenever the motion sensor triggered, and the way the clock in the break room would occasionally stutter, losing 5 minutes at a time. I started to notice that the archives weren't just storing documents, they were storing time, the records of things that had been forgotten or erased. And every time I worked, I felt a little more of my own life being cataloged. I'd find notes in my own handwriting that I didn't remember writing, detailing the movements of someone or something that walked the aisles when the lights went out, and the descriptions were always in the first person, as if I were the one doing the walking. I began to fear sleeping, because when I did, I'd wake up at my desk with no memory of how I'd gotten there. My shoes covered in a fine white frost, and my pockets filled with old, yellowed receipts from decades ago. I started leaving the lights on in every aisle, a violation of company policy that should have been caught on the remote monitoring system, but the cameras never flagged it. It was as if the building wanted the light, wanted me to see what was happening, or perhaps it wanted me to participate. One night I saw a reflection in the window, but it wasn't my own. It was a man in an outdated security uniform, his face blurred as if seen through heavy rain, and he was standing right behind me, his hand hovering inches from my shoulder. I didn't turn around. I simply thanked him for his service and kept my eyes fixed on the blank monitor, and the pressure on my shoulder vanished, replaced by a deep, hollow silence that lasted until dawn. I understand now that this job isn't about security, it's about stewardship, about keeping the threshold between the forgotten and the remembered from collapsing. I sometimes wonder if I'll ever be able to walk out those double doors for the last time, or if I'm just another piece of the archive, a footnote in a ledger that no one is ever going to read. I continue to log the anomalies, the shifting aisles, the clicking in the metal, and the cold spots that appear when the clock strikes 2:14. And though I sometimes feel the urge to leave, to drive away and never look back, I know that if I did, the balance would shift, and the things that dwell in the silence of these aisles would have nowhere to go. So I sit here, a quiet guardian of the unknown, and wait for the motion sensor to blink red, for the paper to drift from the shelf, and for the man in the uniform to stand behind me, a silent partner in a job that has no end. And whenever the phone rings in the dead of night, I answer it, even though I know there will only be a long, steady breath on the other end, the sound of someone else beginning their own shift in a place that exists just outside the reach of the waking world, waiting for me to finally stop watching, to stop recording, and to finally, inevitably, become part of the record myself.